In this video, we're going to look at how to read a knitting pattern. So this is for a cable jumper. Don't panic if you feel that this jumper is a bit too advanced. It just has everything in it I need to show you. You can do it. I've not shown you cabling yet, but we could do it, but it's more to show you all the bits that are in the pattern. So you always get some nice pictures of the pattern made up, which is always useful, so you can see what it looks like. You will get this information. So here you've got about your sizing. Just zoom in for that a little bit for you. Okay, so it gives you bust measurements, length measurements, sleeve seams, so that you can pick which size you need to make for whoever it is you're making for, yourself or somebody else. I'm quite tall, so the actual length, I usually find a straight bit of body and throw in a couple of extra inches, because otherwise everything comes too short on me. But again, that's something that the more you make, the more practice you'll get. It then tells you underneath what yarn you need, okay, and for each size, how many balls of that yarn that you need. Now, obviously, if you are substituting your yarn, so if you choose not to use this one, then you would need to look for the same weight and make sure that you check how much your total meterage or yardage is, so this times this, and then make sure you've got enough of the yarn that you are going to use, because different balls of yarn, even though they might be the same weight, might have different amounts of actual wool in them. What you also usually find is a tension. Here we go. So this bit here is your tension. Again, if you're substituting, this is the most important bit. Make sure that the yarn you're choosing to use instead still makes up to this tension on the right size needles. Okay, if you've got to adjust to get that size right, that's fine, but it must be that number of stitches and rows to make a 10 centimetre square with whatever size needles it takes. If your tension's off, then your garment won't be the right size, and that can cause problems. You'll also be told what other things you need. So obviously we need knitting needles. It's quite common to have a smaller pair and a bigger pair. The smaller pair are usually for the rib section, and then the bigger pair for the body and the sleeves. Stitch holders are particularly useful. They look like a giant nappy pin. If I've just got one handy. That when we are doing sort of the back and the neck, for example, I've not got one handy, then we can place stitches on a stitch holder and pick them up again later. And obviously this particular jumper's got cables on it, so you need a cable needle. A cable needle I have got handy. There's definitely one in the bottom of this little bag here. There are different types of cable needles. The most common ones look like this. And basically what happens is we knit onto here. It holds the needles while we knit some others, and then we knit back off here. But again, that's a separate video for me to do. You'll notice this has also got some information about where to get your yarn from if you want to get that yarn. And it has special abbreviations. So it doesn't have the normal ones that we would use in every pattern, so K for knit and P for purl. But the special ones that are needed for doing the cabling are listed here, so you know. It gives you here a little diagram of when you finished it and blocked it out, what your final measurements should be in different places. And we've also got, because it's cabling, there are some charts. Please don't panic about those for now. We're not going to worry about those today. All right. So this particular pattern, again, because it's got the cables in it, has got a specific section on how to make the stitch pattern. So here and here. Again, that's not my big worry for today. So what I want to talk to you here is about what is standard that you will see on most knitting patterns that you start. So here we go. Gives you a little bit of information. The raglan is a special feature in jumpers that creates this neat shoulder here. Okay, so when it talks about a raglan, it's just creating this effect at the shoulder, this kind of diagonal. Looks very neat. Again, quite common, but that's all that means. So it starts with the back, and again, that's really common for a jumper or a cardigan, is that we start with the back panel, which is usually the simplest piece to make, because quite often, even if the front's pattern, the back might be plain, and it's one big piece, so we just go. So it starts with row 1, RS is right side, so that's going to be the bit that faces outwards when you wear it, and your pattern looks like this. K2 means knit 2, that little asterisk, and then P2 for purl 2, K2 for knit 2. Repeat from the asterisk to the end. So this is knit 2, purl 2, rib, which we've got in one of my other videos. And that's literally all it's telling you to do. Knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 to the end of the row. Okay, then we get to row 2 and it tells us to start with a purl 2, and we purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2. Okay, this bit here tells us what the size needles we're using and how many stitches we need to cast on before we can do this. Okay, so we're using the thinner needles, like I said, that's really common for the rib. And then depending on your size, so if you remember up here, we had our size chart. So we had size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So depending on which one you're doing, that determines which size 1, size 2, size 3, size 4, size 5, size 6. And that will be the same in all brackets. So all instructions for your size will be in the same position. So if you're doing size 6, you'll always be looking for the last number in the bracket, okay, all the way through. But once you've cast on the right number of stitches, we're going to do knit 2, purl 2, rib on row 1, purl 2, knit 2 on row 2, all the way across, ending with purl 2. That's why it says to last 2 stitches. And then it says continue in knit 2, purl 2, rib as set, so repeating these 2 rows until the work measures the right number of centimetres for your size. Okay, that's a really common way to start a jumper or a cardigan or garment. Okay, is that we have rib, it's a 2-row repeat, right side and wrong side, and they'll tell you to do it until it measures a certain thing. So please make sure you've got a good tape measure, you will need it. Once you've done that, it's very common to have an increase row. So this pattern has done the increase row on the wrong side. Okay, that's why it says here, ending after a right side row. So you're going to do a right side row that gets to your right length and stop, and then the wrong side row, so starting with what would have been a purl 2 first, is where you do your increase. Now it says purl 1, make 1 purl. So I've covered making 1 in my increase video, okay, and it tells you how many times to do that depending on your size. Okay, so that instruction is actually only for sizes 4 and 5. Sizes 1, 2, 3 and 6 don't need to do that. Then it says pattern this many. Okay, so whatever size you're doing, so if you're doing the smallest size, you're going to do 17 stitches in the purl 2, knit 2. Okay, that's what pattern means, what we're doing already. And then make 1, purl 1, pattern this many times. Make 1, purl 1, pattern to the last, depending on how many stitches here. So either to the last stitch or right to the end, and make 1, purl 1 here. So basically what this is saying is that these 2 sizes have got some extra increases, okay? And it tells you here how many stitches you should now have. Now that's important. If your stitch count is wrong, you do need to go back and change it because it will affect everything you do from there on in, okay? And then once we've sorted our increase out, it says change to our bigger needles. So we change to our bigger needles, and we are now starting the main part of the body. Now this particular pattern, we go to the right side, it's telling you to knit however many depending on your size, and then purl 2, and then work row 1 of the small cable chart. Okay, work row 1 of the large cable chart, repeat that, and then do another small cable chart over the next 16 stitches, purl 2, and then do these stitches at the end. And because there's no new stitch count, there's been no increases or decreases, so it should still be the same stitch count we had at the end of the last row. Okay, now it might not always be this descriptive. Like I say, this is a cable jumper. If you were just doing a plain jumper, this would be a knit row and then a purl row and then a knit row and then a purl row. And again, it might tell you to do that for a certain amount of length. So this one, you've got your 2 sections for your instructions, and again it says continue in the pattern as set, that's these 2 rows, until you get to your work measures this length for your size. When it says work measures, that's from the very beginning, so that includes your rib. All right, now because this is straight, if you wanted to make it longer or shorter than the dimensions given, this is where you would adjust. Okay, so if you know you want this jumper to be 2 inches longer than the pattern says, you would do 2 more inches than it says here. Equally, if you wanted a more cropped version or you've got a shorter body, this is where you would take that off, because this is just a straight section. What is then going to move on to is shaping for the raglan and the armholes, and we don't want to be making those changes there because it gets complicated. Okay, so what it talks about here is casting off some stitches at the beginning of the next 2 rows. That's a really common way to start an armhole is by casting off a set number of stitches at the beginning of these 2 rows. Now you'll notice it doesn't give you any pattern instructions, so that means you're carrying on with the pattern as you've just been doing, okay, but decreasing at the beginning of the next 2 rows. And again, it tells you, because you've decreased, how many stitches you should have at the end of those 2 rows. It then goes on to continue with some decrease instructions. So initially it says decrease 1 stitch at end of every row. It doesn't tell you what decrease to use here, so commonly it's knit 2 together or purl 2 together if it doesn't tell you. Again, it tells you how many times to do that, so how many rows depending on your size, and how many stitches you will have at the end of that section. Then it wants you to decrease 1 stitch at the end of every following right side row. So from here on in, we're not decreasing every row, but only on the right side rows. Okay, again, it tells you how many times, and when you finish that section, how many stitches you should have. And then it says break yarn and leave your stitches on a holder. What that means is you've finished the back, and you'll have some stitches which will be the middle of the back, but that will be your neck, that you're going to put on a stitch holder. So we're not casting off, because when you do your neckband, you'll pick those stitches up. Okay, after that, you move on to doing the front, and the front will start usually like this: work as back up to where you see 2 stars, which was here. Okay, so you're going to do everything you did for the back up to here, and then you'll get some new instructions. All right, and those new instructions might include some neck shaping. Okay, so here you have your shape, your left front neck. So knit 2, slip, slip, knit. So that's slip 1, and knit the slip stitches together. Tells you to pattern, again, leaving stitches on a stitch holder. So that's at least 2 stitch holders we need here. It didn't specify at the beginning, it just said stitch holders. It didn't say how many, but I suspect you're probably going to need 3, maybe 5, depends on the sleeves. Okay, then it talks to you about how to do your decreases for the neck. Okay, so knit 2 together, slip, slip, knit, knit 2, tells you how many stitches you've decreased, purl 2 and purl 2 together. And again, it tells you how many stitches you should have when you've done that section. And here you go, another holder there. And then you work on the other side. Okay, so again, we have left some on a stitch holder, and we work the other side of the neck. Similar instructions here. And then again, another stitch holder there. Then you do the sleeves. Now, the best trick for sleeves, personally, is to do them both at the same time. So if you can just basically, you knit 2 sleeves on 1 needle. So if you imagine this is your needle, this could be 1 sleeve, and I'd have another one here being worked from separate balls of yarn. The beauty of doing that is you don't get really fed up after doing 1 sleeve and think, oh God, I've got to make another one. They're both already there. And also, if you lose count anywhere along the way, at least your sleeves still end up the same length, as opposed to you ending up with 1 sleeve longer than the other because you've lost track of where you're up to in your pattern. A row counter will help you with that. So here you go. Again, you're going to start with ribs, so you're on your smaller needles. Tells you how many stitches to cast on. Obviously, it's not as many because it's only going around your wrist, not round your body. Again, the instructions are exactly the same to start with as were on your sleeves, the same type of ribbing. And again, it tells you how long it wants it to be, 5 centimetres. This time it's not dependent on your size, it wants a 5 centimetre cuff regardless. Then you're going to change to your bigger needles, and the sleeves on this pattern are plain. Okay, so all the instructions you've got are about when you're doing your increases to make your sleeve go wider as you go up. Okay, it's very useful when it's written like this to sometimes write out all the row numbers and keep a track of which ones you're going to have to increase on, because this one says you're going to increase 1 stitch at each end of the 3rd row, then the whichever row for your size, and then the following. So for example, if we're doing the smallest size, you do the 3rd row, then the 6th row, and then every 6th row after that. So row 6, row 12, row 18. So it's worth writing them down, because then following 6th row, and then the 8 following 8th rows. So yeah, you need to keep a track of where you're going to be doing your increases. It's very easy to get confused when it's written like that. Okay, tells you how many stitches you should end up with after doing all those increases. Then you'll go straight for a bit until, again, it gives you a length. Again, if you've got long arms, this is the bit where you do your increase before you start shaping the raglan. Again, it says end with a wrong side row because we're going to start on a right side row for the next bit, casting off again for the armhole for 2 rows and a new stitch count, and then doing your decreases. Again, like your increases, it's written on which rows, so make yourself a list, because again, some of these don't apply to every size. Okay, again, yeah, being left on a stitch holder. In this instance, what you'll now have is the back, both the shoulders of your sleeves and your front sections all on stitch holders, so I reckon that's going to be 6 for this pattern, and you'll do your neckband by picking up from them. Okay, so again, we're back onto our small needles. It tells you where to pick each of them up from. Pick up and knit down the front of the neck, try and keep that even, as well as doing decreases at the same time. So again, you might find it useful to find out what you're doing where, and then you'll be doing some rib. Cast off in rib pattern simply means that, so you're doing knit 2, purl 2, rib, that when you're doing a knit stitch, you cast off knitwise, and when you're doing a purl stitch, you cast off purlwise. That's all that means. And then the last thing you'll need to do is sew your pieces together and weave in all of your ends, and you can block it if you want to. Some patterns suggest blocking before sewing and others blocking afterwards. A lot of the time it depends on the yarn. If you're using acrylic, it doesn't block massively, whereas if you're using wools and cottons, it's always worth blocking those out. So yeah, so that is how you read a knitting pattern.